السلام عليكم.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وسبحان الله العلي العظيم، والحمد لله رب العالمين، ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، ونشهد أن محمد رسول الله. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على الحبيب المصطفى خاتم الأنبياء والرسل أجمعين، المرسل رحمة للعالمين، وعلى آله الأطهار الميامين، وعلى أصحابه المختارين. سبحان الله سبحان الله، نؤمن به ونستعينه ونستهديه ونستجيره ونستنصره، فإنه حق من هدى الله فلا مضل له، ومن يضلله فلا هادي له. اللهم يا علي عظيم، اللهم إنا نسألك أن تقسم لنا من خشيتك ما يحول بيننا وبين معاصيك، وأن تقسم لنا من رحمتك ما يقربنا من طاعتك، وأن ترزقنا من اليقين ما يهون علينا مصائب الدنيا وأحداثها يا رب العالمين. Obviously, the most the events taking place in the world that one cannot ignore. The most overwhelming set of events that one cannot overlook is yet again and again, what is taking place in Gaza. And the Israeli bombardment in Gaza and the rise in casualties. The most recent set of events underscore the extent to which we collectively, as Muslims, are, despite our numbers, despite how much we try to ignore the fact, are so marginalized that the assault on one's senses and one's sensibilities truly become overwhelming. As we all know, Netanyahu's government has been confronting mass demonstrations and mass protests in Israel because Netanyahu faces a series of corruption charges. And he is able to avoid prosecution on these corruption charges as long as he continues to be a prime minister. And most of us have followed how Netanyahu wanted to change the law in Israel, and especially to weaken the role of the judiciary, to effectively render himself immune from prosecution. And his plans to do so were met with mass protests in Israel, and quite unlike what happens in a Muslim country when a Muslim leader decides to become more autocratic or more despotic or more dictatorial, when a Muslim is involved, the Western world in particular, including the United States, not only do not do anything to impede the progress of dictatorship and despotism, but even more, quite often, the message sent to a dictator in the Muslim world is, go ahead, promote and anchor and establish your autocracy, and we simply do not care as long as our business interests are not impeded. But because Netanyahu is from a country that the West actually cares about, and a country which the West does not consider a part of the third world and a part of the dark-skinned world, Netanyahu's effort to take Israel towards a more authoritarian turn in its domestic politics was met with all types of, let's say, obstacles setting, even from Western countries. So for the time being, Netanyahu put his plans to change the constitutional system and the court system in Israel on hold because of the local protests and because of the reaction of Western countries. However, as most of us know, in order for Netanyahu to come to power, Netanyahu entered into an unholy alliance with a number of extremist, militant, and outright racist Israeli political movements. These political movements are led by people like Ben Gvir and Mustanovich, who have a very long record, not just in racist diatribes against Arabs generally, and Palestinians especially, but also a long record of Islamophobia, including the Day of the Flags, in which the parties of these people engage in slurs against the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and against Muslims at large. Anyway, recently, Ben Gvir has insisted that Netanyahu's government, as well as Smotrich, but particularly Ben Gvir, has insisted that Netanyahu's government must go back to the policy of extrajudicial assassinations, extrajudicial killings against Palestinians. In fact, recently, Ben Gvir refused to attend cabinet meetings in the Netanyahu government and threatened to pull out of the alliance with the Netanyahu government. If the Netanyahu government does not take military acts against Palestinians, in other words, if the Netanyahu government does not wage an assault against Palestinians in Gaza, what complicates the picture further is both Ben Gvir and Smotrich, with Netanyahu's blessings, have been engaging in regular assaults against the Aqsa Mosque, trying to change the facts on the ground, to force Muslims to share time with Jewish extremists in the Aqsa Mosque, so that Jewish extremists will have a claim over the Aqsa Mosque at least equal to, if not superior to, Muslims. And these violations of the sanctity of the Aqsa Mosque have been regular and ongoing. This all leads up to this latest round. So Ben Gvir is not just violating the sanctity of the Aqsa Mosque with the blessings of the Netanyahu government and with its affirmative aid and help, but again, Ben Gvir is demanding military escalation against Palestinians. Otherwise, they pull out of the Netanyahu government, and then that means that the Netanyahu government would lose power, and Netanyahu would have to confront the reality of charges pending against him. And of course, it is no surprise that once Netanyahu heeded Ben Gvir's call and started military action against Gaza, Ben Gvir announced happily that he will now recommit to attending cabinet meetings and in staying within the coalition, Netanyahu's coalition. So what precisely did Israel do? The Egyptians, Sisi's government, contacted the Jihad organization and told the Jihad in Gaza that the Israelis are interested in holding talks for de-escalation. The Egyptian government assured the Jihad that not only that the Israelis are serious about holding these talks, but in fact guaranteed the safety of the Jihad's representatives. So they were invited to go to Cairo to meet with Israeli officials to hold talks leading to de-escalation. The trip to Cairo was supposed to be 9 a.m. And because of Egyptian assurances and guarantees and promises, 3 members of the Jihad organization, 3 leaders from the Jihad organization that were supposed to head the talks with the Israelis in Cairo, went out of hiding. Normally, their security detail is that they never sleep in a place, they never sleep in their homes. And they constantly change their location. But because of the Egyptian assurances, these 3 leaders went home to sleep with their family, to wake up the next morning, to go to Egypt, to hold talks. As they slept in their home, in the midst of their family, with their wives and children, that's when the Israelis struck. Now, what the Israelis did, which if anyone else did, you can imagine the world's reaction. They didn't try to arrest these leaders. They didn't even try to do any type of operation that would avoid civilian casualties. They simply tracked them as they slept at their home, again because of Egyptian assurances and guarantees, and because they were going to wake up the next day and go to Cairo, 40 Israeli airplanes took to the air, and they simply fired missiles into their homes. Obviously, it doesn't take a genius to completely foresee that you're firing missiles into homes in which there are women and children sleeping. The attack happened at 3 in the morning. So the civilian casualties were entirely foreseeable and entirely predictable. Not only were these 3 leaders killed, but every single one of them, killed with them, was their wives and 1 or 2 of their children. For reasons unknown, the Israelis also attacked a doctor called Jamal Khaswan. This doctor has no known associations with jihad. He heads a non-profit organization that raises money to take care of the widows and orphans of people who have been killed by Israel. But he was also targeted, and his family had a missile fired into their, in fact, not just apartment. What the Israelis did was fire at the entire floor in the building. So yes, obviously, the 4 targeted men, the 3 members of the jihad, and the medical doctor who heads a non-profit organization, but with them were women and children. Here are the faces of the 5 children killed. But with these 5 children killed, there are scores of children that have been injured, some of them in critical condition. I have been tracking what the Israelis are saying, what Israeli media is saying, and what the world media is saying. As to Israeli media, no one knows if the Egyptians conspired with the Israelis, gave these folks assurances and guarantees, knowing fully well that they were tricking and trapping them so that Israel can assassinate them. No one knows if the Egyptian intelligence did this intentionally and knowingly, or whether they were tricked by Israel. In Israel's media, a lot of the Israeli commentators don't know either. But what is most interesting is they all entertain the possibility that Egyptian intelligence conspired with Israeli intelligence very casually. But so many commentators say, but even if the Egyptians didn't conspire with us, and even in fact, if Israel fooled the Egyptians and Palestinians, even if Israel gave false promises to the Egyptians, and the Egyptians, acting in good faith, passed these assurances and promises along to the Palestinians, only to be betrayed and stabbed in the back, even if every single Israeli commentator that I've read comments, we have nothing to worry about because it doesn't matter if we trick or betray these people, they will never dare to take any type of affirmative action against us. We can trick, we can lie, we can deceive these people as much as we want, and they will always grovel to maintain our approval and maintain a relationship with us. In other words, this is treachery without a cost. World commentary, especially in the Western world, no one, and I mean no one, talks about the occupation. No one talks about the right to resist an occupation. No one talks about treachery. I want you to imagine if this treachery was committed by a Muslim party. I want you to imagine if it was Muslims who made promises, gave guarantees, only to betray and to murder. I want you to imagine how this act would have been taken as an indication of the morality of Muslims at large, how talking heads would have appeared everywhere to pontificate not just about the morality of what Muslims did, but even about the immorality of their prophet. And how all of this would have been taken as a sign of a deep crisis that Islam and Muslims have with ethics and morality and the very notion of law and the very notion of values in a civilized world. But because it is the Israelis and because it is committed against Muslims, no one even entertains the thought that this is treachery, this is betrayal. No one even mentions the fact that the Israelis fired missiles into residential homes packed with women and children. One of the children who died from sheer fear. This child was actually not hit by anything, but died from sheer terror and fear. Israel knew fully well that having done what they've done, that the Palestinians would have no choice but to respond. And everyone knows, in all sophisticated political circles, that this is not about an actual campaign with any type of military goals, but this is simply to satisfy Ben-Gvir and Smotrich so that they can remain within the Netanyahu coalition, and the Netanyahu coalition needs violence against Palestinians so that it can stay in power and avoid criminal charges. And although everyone knows this, no one in any serious moral engagement says, what price for the children? What price for these innocent civilians? Why should they die because a corrupt politician doesn't want to go to prison? Why should they die because of political leaders who have well-known track records of being racist, bigoted, extremist, supremacists, Islamophobic? No one seriously is talking about that at all. Meanwhile, Israeli forces continue to kill Palestinians far away from Gaza in the West Bank. Israeli forces killed 2 Palestinians in West Bank raid, Ahmad Assaf and Rani Qatanat, in the town of Qabatiyah. Israel demolishes a Palestinian school, a school, by the way, that was funded and built by the European Union. Another news item: Israeli settlers destroy 5,000 Palestinian trees in the past 5 months alone. It is clear that not only does Israel act as an apartheid state, regularly subordinating and abusing Palestinians, but Israel uses violence against Palestinians and uses the language of security and the war against terrorism in a way that violates every human rights standard known to humankind. Now, I have, though, Allah invites us in every situation of crisis to reflect and to ponder not just the injustice, so we can feel diminutive, or that we experience the feeling of bitterness and being broken, but to turn every occasion for hurt and pain into an opportunity for reflection and growth. Let me expand upon this picture a bit. As Israel basically tricks three jihad leaders into a situation where it can slaughter them, and as Israel uses its overwhelming military might to yet unleash another slaughter against Palestinians in Gaza. Gaza is the perpetual punching bag of the Israelis. They punch that bag whenever it serves their purposes and serves their interests to do so. What is happening in that larger, broader context? Remarkably, just days ago, right before Israel launched its assault against Gaza, Israel, there is an Israeli embassy in the Emirates, held the first ever celebration for Israeli Independence Day in an Arab state and in a Muslim country. The Israeli embassy in the Emirates invited some 600 Emirati dignitaries. The Emirati government celebrated with the Israeli government, with the Israeli embassy, Israeli Independence Day. Emirati singers joined Israeli singers in singing the Israeli national anthem and other Israeli nationalistic songs. As the Emirat sent this unequivocal message that it doesn't matter to us that you are an occupying state. It doesn't matter that you have been condemned by a million different United Nations resolutions for your violations against international law. It doesn't matter that you subjugate and dominate and brutalize Palestinians. It doesn't matter. What matters to us is that you support our autocratic, despotic state. And because you do, we will celebrate with you, regardless of the cost to our fellow Muslims. But this is the same Emirat that ironically, just 2 weeks before, one of the most remarkable commentaries about our modern state, Mohammed bin Zayed, travels to Eastern Cape. As he visits Eastern Cape, he spends a whopping $320 million to have a party in Eastern Cape. He flies in 30 women. According to the article, the women are Russian and Asian women, all of them model types, the best looking women you can find around, flies them to a farm in Eastern Cape. What these 30 women had to do is not known, other than entertain and keep Mohammed bin Zayed and his guests happy. So imagine this. The same country that has spent millions of dollars supporting and funding Islamophobic organizations all over the world celebrates Israeli Independence Day, regardless, completely ignoring the fact that Israel is a systematic and consistent violator of international law. At the same time, spending $320 million on a party that ironically was held at the end of Ramadan, right after Ramadan. When you find a world that is so morally imbalanced, in which the picture that describes the affairs of Muslims is so abysmally ugly that it defies description. There was another news item to add to this picture. Most of us have heard of Lajane Hazloul, the Saudi woman who was abducted in the Emirat, extradited to Saudi Arabia, and was imprisoned and tortured in Saudi Arabia because she's fighting for the rights of women to drive cars. The irony is, after she was arrested and tortured, the Saudi government did what Lajane Hazloul was advocating for, but the fact that the Saudi government allowed Saudi women to drive cars, did in no way mitigate or in no way alleviate the hardship for Lajane Hazloul. After numerous protests by numerous human rights organizations and some pressure by the US government, Lajane Hazloul was released from prison, but is not allowed to leave Saudi Arabia. It surfaces that an American company and that US operatives were intimately involved in the process of spying on Lajane Hazloul, breaking into her electronic media, transmitting the information obtained about Lajane Hazloul to the Saudi government. So in other words, an American company and American operatives were intimately involved in the process of arresting and imprisoning Lejane Hazloul and the set of events that led to her torture and mistreatment. Lejane hired lawyers in the US who have been trying to bring a lawsuit against these American entities to hold them responsible for the role in the apprehension and mistreatment of Lejane Hazloul. I don't want to get into the technicalities of the lawsuit. That's not what's relevant. But yet again, you find that the world, the way the world relates to Muslims, is not at all from the perspective or the point of view that Muslims are human beings like any other human beings, entitled to rights, entitled to dignity, entitled to decent treatment like any other human beings. But we enter into this bizarre world of exceptionalism and suspended reason when Muslims are involved. American companies help trap a Muslim activist. The world sees the slaughter of Muslim children and sits to the side and doesn't say anything. The world sees an autocrat who is openly and publicly engaging in human trafficking, flying women internationally to God knows do what, splurging millions of dollars just to entertain himself and his guests, and most of his guests, in fact, are from the Western world. A remarkably ugly and grim picture that doesn't have the hint of moral sense, decency, goodness, or anything else. When you read, for instance, that the biggest supplier of arms to dictatorships and autocracies in the world is our own country, the United States, that in fact 58% of our weapons sales goes to bolster and support dictators, autocrats, like the King of Saudi Arabia, like the ruler of the Emirates. Leave alone all of our military sales and gifts to Israel that they then use without accountability and without any real moral limits. And when you read that the biggest supporter of autocrats in the Muslim world is not China, is not Russia, but it is indeed the United States. And that in the same country that is responsible for the largest share of Islamophobia about how Muslims do not understand human rights, do not understand democracy, do not understand moral values, is the very same country that does the most in the world to shore up Muslim dictators, Muslim autocrats, the logic of Muslim exceptionalism all around the globe. This picture is a picture of inkisar, a picture that unless the Muslim soul invests in the art of dealing with trauma and processing trauma to positive ends, ultimately it leaves the Muslim soul broken and twisted, that it twisted in a way that will inevitably result in pathologies of thought and pathologies of action. In other words, if not properly dealt with, this anarchic, grotesque, overwhelmingly ugly picture, wherever you turn, will result in a Muslim psyche incapable of producing beauty, because everything that it takes in, that it absorbs, is indeed ugly and overwhelming. The next khutbah, I will talk about the processing of this trauma. أقول قولي هذا أستغفر الله لي ولكم أسأل الله يستجب لكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وسبحان الله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه واتبعوا بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. None of us can change the reality of Muslims in one big swoop. This age for Muslims is not the age of great leaders and great commanders like Khalid ibn al-Walid or Salah ad-Din or the like. This age is an age in which the balance of power and the balance of moralities is so stacked up against Muslims, so imbalanced, that any grand thinking will very quickly be challenged by micro complexities that are truly overwhelming and that will always lead to a sense of frustration, futility, and ultimately apathy. Why apathy? Because time and again you look around and you find things are so wrong and you are incapable of changing anything. Collectively, acting as a group, Muslims are truly vulnerable. Acting in a concerted fashion through some type of organizational logic, time and time, the challenges that confront Muslims, including challenges by rulers like those in the Emirates or Saudi Arabia, that do everything within their power to manufacture Muslim futility and Muslim vulnerability throughout the world, when you know that acting collectively is a failed project, what is the most logical thing if you do not want to surrender to failure, if you do not want to make failure your consistent and unwavering reality? If we cannot change things at a macro level, if we cannot change things through major strategic moves that alter the reality that we confront in big steps, if you will, this only puts a greater emphasis and places a greater importance on the role of the individual. This is not the age where sloganisms about Allahu Akbar and victory to Muslims are going to lead us anywhere. What will change our reality is an ethic of individual excellence that we raise our children with, but that this individual excellence, we must always teach our children that within you personally, individually, you embody the entire Ummah. Your success is the success of the Ummah. Your excellence is the excellence of the Ummah. Your prosperity is the prosperity of the Ummah. Let me put it even more directly. In an age in which we see a corrupt autocrat throwing away over $300 million to indulge in an orgy, while we have to struggle to find a few $1,000s to support any Muslim cause, you are not going to be able to change the geopolitical reality that maintains this autocrat. But your victory is to excel as an individual Muslim, to become wealthy as an individual Muslim, and to expend the money that you make as an individual Muslim in moral causes as opposed to immoral causes. In the 1800s, and to this very day, a very large number, a very large percentage of the greatest artists that Europe has seen, the greatest musicians the greatest pianists, the greatest violinists, the greatest cellists that Europe has seen were Jewish. Jews prevailed over their persecution. They defeated the stark reality of anti-Semitism and persecution through an individual ethic of success and excellence. Every Jewish mother would look at her child, if that child is gifted in music, and say, you owe it to the Jewish people to be the best that you can be. Go be an Ishaq Perlman. Go be any of the great Jewish musicians of the past century and present century. But remember, wherever you go, you are an ambassador to the Jewish people. People have no clue the extent to which, just in one field, this process of ambassadorship, today, you cannot be a part of the artistic world of classical music, for instance, without having to deal and having to have intimate and good and healthy relationships with the musicians of Israel and the Israeli symphony and all the art that goes through the richness of Jewish identity. We must raise our children to say, you see, we are a broken people. We are a subjugated people. We are a disempowered people. Please understand, Mohammed bin Salman doesn't represent Islam. They're not even Muslim. Mohammed bin Zayed doesn't represent Islam. They're not even Muslim. The ugliness that you see is not Islam. The Islam is you. It's your excellence, your success. Do the best you can and be the best you can be. But do it for the sake of Islam and the Muslim people. It doesn't mean that you have to join any larger cause, but you have to always retain and remember within the self that in fact you are the embodiment of the living Islam. If there are enough of us, when the day comes, when there are millions and millions of successful Muslims, wherever you turn, in every field, our reality as Muslims will change. If the human rights field today was populated by pioneering Muslims in human rights thought, the travesty that we witness in Gaza, the travesty that we witness all over the Muslim world and all over where Muslims are involved, would not be. This is a subtle point, but a critical point. You see, when we project our success onto a larger community symbol, when we say, oh, I, as an individual, I am not important, it is the Ummah that is important. It is the collectivity that is important. We doom ourselves to frustration and failure. Because we say it is the collective entity that must succeed, when we see that there is no path forward for that collective entity, for that ummah, that ummah keeps getting subjugated, dominated, and abused without recourse, the individual loses heart and indeed loses faith. And the individual starts putting all their energy in minutia and trivialities because they believed in a cause that is unwinnable. But if you focus the energy and attention of the individual and say, you individually, you are the representation of Islam. And in fact, you have an Islamic and moral obligation to succeed and to excel, but to do so as a Muslim, not despite being Muslim. Forget the larger causes. Forget about what you can do with the MSA or what you can do with this organization or that organization. Forget that. Just be successful and influential in your field, whatever your field is, and commit to promoting and helping the cause of Islam at large as a successful individual, not as a broken and a powerless individual. One last word. What makes a successful people? Again, it is entirely noticeable, and everyone knows, that in recent decades, you cannot be anything, or you cannot think about the world of art and the world of creative thought without being well versed in the contributions of Japanese artists, South Korean artists, Chinese and Taiwanese artists, that in the past few decades, whether it is in the sciences, in the creative arts, or in music, South Koreans, Taiwanese, Japanese have made powerful and substantial and remarkable contributions. Today, while 50 years ago you could hardly find someone from Japan or South Korea or China who had anything or any role to play in the world of classical music, today, people from these cultures play a huge role, just in the example of classical music. I'm always struck, again, I'm always struck by the role that mothers play. It is mothers who instill a powerful work ethic in children. It is mothers who give their children a sense of pride in work, in excellence. It is mothers who imbue children with the sense of a mission, a sense that I represent my people or an entire people, and that my success is their success. Alas, I find, may Allah forgive me if I'm wrong, but in my opinion, wherever I have experienced it, Muslim mothers are woefully inadequate. Muslim mothers raise children to value material possessions, and material enjoyment. Somehow, among the destitute and oppressed people of the world, and we are destitute and oppressed, and it's time to wake up to that reality. We are not among the leaders of the world or the dominant forces of the world. We are subalterns. We are oppressed. But among the oppressed people of the world, time and again, I find Muslim mothers raising their children on the principles of material consumption and material enjoyment. What is important is that you find a husband, you find a wife that can give you material support, material stability, that the entire focus is on how your home looks, what you drive, the pleasure and luxuries of life. I don't know what will change this reality. I don't know what will happen or needs to happen so that we raise our mothers with a very different outlook onto the world. You are raising a soldier of Islam, but a soldier who never holds a weapon and never fires a gun. A soldier of Islam through excellence, through hard work, through itqan, perfection. How do we bring that change in the ethos of motherhood in the world of Islam? Remember, that the ethos of safety and security are also consistent with the ethos of defeatism and ineffectiveness. if mothers raise their children on the ethos that your first priority in life is to always just be safe, instead of to be innovative, to be creative, to break new grounds, to make new inventions. The ethos of safety and security are cowardly ethos. But yet, the ethos in safety and security seem to be prevalent among the mothers of Islam. And I hedge what I say because I wish that I am wrong. And I wish and I hope that someone can convince me otherwise. Because that is really the heart of the problem. اللهم اعف عنا اللهم اغفر لنا اللهم ارحمنا اللهم تب علينا يا تواب يا رحمن يا رحيم واهدنا لأقرب من هذا رشدا. Allah forgive our sins. Allah guide us to the right path. Allah enable us to be true soldiers of Islam, true bearers of your moral path and your moral code, so that we can be guidance to humanity, Ya Ali Ya Azim, as well as guidance to ourselves. وصلي وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه وأقم الصلاة.